like Canelo, this guy can do. He can pick and choose who he want to fight. And I'm gonna tell y'all the truth about Canelo. Motherfucker, easy, man. Cakewalk, easy.
Look, I thought Lara outpointed him. And was it close? Yeah, I thought it was close, but I still thought Lara put rounds in the bank. And nothing is going to change my mind from it.
Lara utilizing that vaunted footwork. Canelo already.
Canelo's got to do a better job of setting up power because it's not Angulo in front of him tonight.
That was the question.
You guys are constantly disrespected. You constantly disrespecting Tank. You disrespecting so many fighters. Even like Lara. If you go back and look at the Lara versus Canelo, I could have went either way.
Forward to this fight. I haven't scored it in a while, but I remember how I felt about it. What's happening, everyone, and welcome to Chile Boxing Talk. We got the whole panel here. We got Nopal Boxeanos in the house, Run PMC, and Sean Gringo Hicks. And he's a panelist with us, but you guys can always catch him on Long Live Boxing at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. He had a great show last time. He didn't have a chance to talk about the Tank fight, but we got him here to give us a hot take on that. And man, I'll tell you what, that was one hell of a weekend of fights, huh? And this is what we're going to do, man. We're going to get into a quick weekend recap. Like at first, we were just going to do a Canelo versus Lara special. But with the style matchups that were going on this weekend, we have to do a quick weekend recap. And then we're going to get right into Canelo versus Lara. And we hope to have some special guests here in a little bit. So let's get right into it. Sean, man, tell us what you think about the weekend's fights and who'd you have winning each fight?
Okay, yeah. So what's up, everybody? And I hope you guys got a chance to watch the fight. Whether you watched it by paying for it or by stream, shout out to you. All right. So I can relate on both ends. People can say what they want, but I'm the DAZN apologist. So I actually was glad to watch that fight with, Devin Haney versus Jojo Diaz, and very entertaining fight, really good fight, a lot of back and forth. And, I did feel like, I'll go ahead and say it, that I thought that Devin Haney was going to be, boxing on the outside and be the superior boxer. It did kind of play out the way I thought, but Jojo Diaz, I was hoping he let his hands go a little bit more, but he was able, when he got on the inside, he showed, a lot of tenacity and landed some good clean shots and working the body. And he tested the chin of, Haney quite a bit. And, it still kind of showed what I thought. Like Haney was not able to hurt Jojo. Jojo definitely hurt Haney. It looked like the speed adjustment, it took a while for Jojo to get adjusted to it. But when the adjustments were made, Jojo did have success. He did seem tired at the end as far as Jojo. Haney did pull it out, but I scored it actually like a pretty close, like 7-5, maybe 8-4. I don't remember exactly that. When it wasn't like a spectacular fight, I didn't walk away feeling like, wow, Haney's the man, and he's definitely. I didn't rate his level didn't raise up to me. Now, as far as the other fight, now whose level did raise up to me is Pitbull Diaz, and I feel like I owe an apology to him and his team for ever doubting him and his heart and his ability. I did think he was just going to be in a one-dimensional fighter, the smaller fighter, but he had great power. He tested Tank's chin. He has an unbelievable motor. He kept bringing it the entire fight. Enjoyable, switching angles up, had a crazy hook. And then his defense, that's another thing people really weren't saying. Like that, his defense to get the hook. Now he was getting some grazing shots were coming in by Tank. But once Tank saw that he couldn't hurt him and take him out, Tank really didn't have a plan B. And, shout out to, Pitbull for doing his thing. I did have him winning. Actually, I gave it to him 8-4, to be honest. Like I thought it was pretty clear. Doing the rescore on my brothers, man, I think I've gotten a little bit better at viewing fights, and I thought it was pretty easy to score. So did I think they were going to give him the decision? Absolutely not. I wish they would have. And also, side note, I think that's total excuse as far as Tank, whether it was true or not about the hand. It was definitely Pitbull's night, and respect to him and his team.
All right, man. And excellent. Thank you for that breakdown, man. And Run PMC, man. How'd you see the weekend?
Great weekend of fights. I mean, it's been said, but the lightweight division is definitely on fire this month. And George Kambosos, man, just going on the world tour, going to all these fights and seeing who he's going to be his next opponent. But for the Haney fight, I didn't score that fight, but I thought Diaz really started a little too late. He was doing well in the early rounds, but I just think just knowing that Haney is like the quote unquote house fighter for this fight, I thought Diaz would probably have to step up the output and step up the pressure a little earlier, which he did in the latter, probably like the last fourth of the fight a lot. But I mean, I could see it being a really close fight, but I would probably edge it slightly to Haney just based on what the judges might like and just the circumstances surrounding that. But I mean, Haney impressed me in the sense of that he just kept doing what he usually does. That it's just doesn't matter the opponent. He sometimes just sticks to the game plan, which is sort of a tentative but offensive at the same time game plan. Like he doesn't really engage, but he's more of just knows how to outpoint guys. But Diaz, I mean, he impressed me with his heart towards the end of the fight, and he was doing well, being able to parry and catch shots on the gloves at the beginning of the fight. But I just wish he would have stepped up more just to make it more definitive because he wasn't going to get any favors in that fight. Even though I think he didn't get enough credit. I think Haney was getting too much credit, and I don't think he was getting enough credit. But I just think just for how we know how boxing scored, like just with the politics surrounding with who the promoter is, I just think that he needed to do something where he was winning like 8-4, 9-3 to possibly get a draw or a close decision. So I think I could see just from that point of view that Haney outpoints him, but I think Diaz his performance was probably underrated from what people are talking about now. As for Tank and Cruz, I had Cruz winning the fight. I don't have the scorecard in front of me, but I'd have to go look to see what exactly. But I think I had him winning by 1 round, 7-5. But the way I scored that fight, or was just thinking about it, was that I was giving Tank really the benefit of the doubt on the rounds I gave him. So that's why I think it was a 7-5. If not, I might have had it like an 8-4, a little wider. And I think people, just when we look at fights, is just because it's 8-4, which 8-4 would be a wide scorecard. It could mean in certain fights that's a wide scorecard, in certain fights that's actually a close scorecard with competitive rounds. But I think Cruz, I mean, I'd have to offer him and the team an apology because I thought Tank was going to walk through him. I thought he was just going to knock him out and end it, but I think it looks like it's either Tank was overtrained or he was underprepared for this fight because I think his stamina was lacking. I think the Cruz body shots, even though they seem to be giving Tank credit for his body shots, the Cruz body shots, just with the volume he was bringing with them, were really wearing Tank down. And Tank's power, I mean, it didn't show up. I mean, Cruz has a great chin, so I mean, we could take it with what it is, but I don't think that Tank's power was really showing this fight, whether it's a hand injury or not, because he was wearing winning gloves, which has shown sometimes to be fighters wear them for hand injuries, and it's like sort of how the glove. I think Ernie Gabion's touched on in the past how the glove's constructed. It's really to deflect off the opponent's face. That's why they're so good in sparring. It isn't really supposed to like transfer energy as well, but I think Floyd just didn't want to wear Canelo's gloves, and that's why he wasn't wearing the gloves, and that's what it came down to because the winnings were unmarked too. So, is what it is. I think Cruz edged it out, but definitely a great weekend of fights. Hopefully we get like a tournament style where Kambosos. I'd probably want him to see him fight Haney next, just so we get the undisputed going and just get that out of the way. But lightweight division's hot right now.
It sure is. Thank you, Ryan. We're going to take a further look at that next week after Lomachenko fights, man. We're going to break all this down, and take a look at who's at the lightweight division and see who we think might dominate everything at the end. And right now, I'd like to welcome our brother, Sonteo from Sonteo Media. What's happening, man?
Hey, what's happening? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear. Well,
Cool.
we're just talking about the weekend, a little quick weekend recap of what's going on because we thought it would be appropriate because of the Canelo Lara rescore. There's some similarities in the styles loosely, so we wanted to get your take on it. If you watched them and who'd you have winning each fight?
I enjoyed both fights. I'm biased towards Jojo because he's from a city that I worked in for quite a few years. So I was viewing it from being a supporter of Jojo, but I didn't score either fight, that one or the Tank one, but I scored a win both for Haney and for Tank. Both of them were very competitive, I think. But I enjoyed both fights. The Cruz fight was also very entertaining. I think Cruz landed a little bit more successfully on Tank than Jojo on Haney. But I was impressed with how Haney has developed. I think he was being a little bit more creative in his punch selection, and I really enjoyed that. I like seeing fighters progress, and I really liked what was going on in his corner. I like that his dad is bringing in more help, more ammunition. I think we saw Ben Davison. Is that his that coach's correct name? I hope I'm getting that right.
Yeah.
But I thought that's amazing. I thought if a person like Bill Haney can put his ego to the side and bring in as much help to make his son the most successful fighter he can in the ring, I who am I to go against that? I'm all for that. I was contemplating going to Staples Center. It's only about an hour and a half away from me, but it was on a Sunday, and I just couldn't pull the trigger. But I enjoyed both fights.
Oh yeah, dude, they were definitely both enjoyable. Nopal, Boxeanos, man. I think you mentioned that you hadn't seen the Tank fight, but you did watch the Haney fight, bro. Tell us what you thought about it.
Well, I thought it was a good fight. I was actually expecting a little more from Jojo, but I noticed that he was never able to get into his groove, basically. He wasn't able to get into the zone at all like he usually does. And that was due to the fact that Haney just kept popping them shots from far away. You know, he has a 7-inch reach. So every time Jojo would try to get in, Haney was there to, straight shots to the body, hooks to the body, all those kind of shots. And he did a great job. They had a good game plan. I was a little disappointed in the fact that Haney is really, I consider him kind of like big for this division. I know he makes the weight okay and everything, but I think that he would be better suited for 140. But I am a little disappointed, but at the same time, I'm not sure if it's due to the fact that, this isn't the best weight class for him. But I do think that he suffers a little bit from, I don't think his chin is that good, and I think that I don't see his power. And I'm hoping that once he moves up, that might go away. His chin will actually get better. I noticed that some, and I mentioned it before, some fighters, they do neck exercises, and that helps a little bit with the chin. I noticed that, well, I'm not saying that Pitbull got hit really flush, because I saw that on the highlights that he was blocking a lot of those shots, but I noticed that he does a lot of neck exercises. Canelo does them, and that helps with that sort of thing. But I'm hoping that Haney, as he progresses and moves it on the divisions, that he'll grow into his man strength and start knocking people out. But yeah, I thought it was a good fight. As far as scoring it, I thought it was pretty clear win for Haney. I thought that the only clear rounds that Jojo was able to win was probably the fourth and the last round. Those were the only clear rounds. I'd have to go back and rescore it totally to give him any more. But, it was a good fight.
Excellent, man. Great observations all around. And as far as what I saw, I agree with a lot of what everybody had to say. And Sean, you were mentioning that you underestimated Jojo Diaz. And I have to say that I underestimated Devin Haney. I was quite impressed with his boxing skills. Although I understand that Jojo Diaz was coming up in weight, and I understand that he's not necessarily a puncher either, but I was still impressed with Devin Haney's skill set. Also, he showed how you can win rounds going backwards and fighting in range. I had the fight 7-5 for Devin Haney in a clear decision, but I could also see the argument for 8-4. And somebody else mentioned the corner work and Bill Haney. I have to say that I thought the corner was working really smoothly. I liked the advice. I liked how Ben Davison would just chime in just a little bit towards the end to get a couple comments off. Smooth corner. And I thought Devin Haney was very well composed. I was impressed with him all around. So I'm excited to see what he does next. If he does go to Kambosos next, oh man, I would love to just kind of break down some film on that now that we have some really good film on Kambosos and some better film on what Devin Haney can do. And as far as the Tank Davis fight, I have to say that I had him winning that fight as well. Tank Davis impressed me with his actual boxing skills. Usually he just goes and blows out people, but he had much more boxing skills than I think that I've seen, or maybe I just haven't watched a lot of his older fights where they go a little bit longer, but I was totally impressed. Also, he's got great legs. I was surprised how he was able to reset and get away from the action for just a little bit before getting back in there and establishing himself. And Tank did a good job of establishing his position in the fight and dominating the ring. He wasn't necessarily in the center of the ring, but sometimes he would kind of make a stand at a certain angle. And so him and his opponent would have to fight right there, like kind of like the way Marquez would hold his ground against Pacquiao, but sometimes he wouldn't necessarily do it in the middle of the ring, but sometimes, towards maybe even in the ropes or, in some corner, he would make the stand and go forward and push Isaac Cruz back, and I think both Isaac Cruz and Diaz, they needed to get off a little bit more. I know it's easier said than done, and they were applying that forward pressure, but I think that it just wasn't enough to win them rounds for a victory. So I had Tank winning 7-5 in a close but clear decision. All right, man. Anything else you'd like to add before we move on to our controversial rescore of Canelo versus Lara?
Just a random note for me that I know a lot of people were complaining about the commentary or lack thereof as far as being biased. For both shows, but specifically for the the Showtime show with Tank. And I was one time that I guess I was glad and proud to be on Team Stream because all I saw was the fight, man. It helped me just like really appreciate what's going on and no distractions from any propaganda. So shout out to Team Stream for the win.
Yeah,
hey man, that's a good call. With my stream, yeah, I had some Spanish commentary, and I understand conversational Spanish, but as far as like the sweet science Spanish, I'm not quite there yet. So I had to come up with my own conclusions. You know what I mean? All right, well, sweet, man. Let's get right to it. Canelo versus Lara, and this is kind of a relevant fight. We heard Floyd Mayweather piping up about it. He said, "Hey, man, this fight could have gone either way," during his epic rant in the press conference after their Tank fight. So, hey, let's get right into it. And to break it down and let us know what was going on at the time, we have Run PMC. Run, please take it away.
Alrighty. So, Canelo versus Lara, definitely looking back on it, a classic controversial fight, and I'm glad we're getting to cover it. So, this fight took place July the 12th, 2014 from the MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas, Nevada. Almost a capacity crowd, or might be a capacity crowd, because I guess the paid attendance was 14,239 fans. Pay-per-view buys just above 300,000, and this was a non-title fight. This was a fight, I believe this was Canelo's second fight at 155, the first one being the Alfredo Angulo fight. And really, what you're seeing this picture of, this is the post-fight of the Canelo Angulo fight, where Lara came up and basically challenged Canelo to a fight, and Canelo took it in his next fight, which is definitely admirable to see. I mean, we see, especially now, we see a lot of fighters just talking about fighting on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, making posts, but then the fights never come to fruition. So over 7 years ago, someone gets called out. They made it happen, which was great. Both entering this fight, both fighters had one loss and one draw. Canelo's being to Floyd Mayweather, and Lara's being to Paul Williams, which we covered last week. And then for Canelo, this was actually a pretty short turnaround because this was 4 months after his pretty much his destruction of Alfredo Angulo, which was probably at the time one of the biggest ass beatings I've seen in a boxing ring at the bigger weight classes, or bigger not being the heavier weight classes, but sort of those middle 154 to 160s. It was just one way from Canelo. And then it was sort of interesting just getting into the background of that Angulo fight, was that fight was originally supposed to be at 154, but in the later parts of camp, Canelo said it had to be at 155 because he was nervous with making weight. Then he paid Angulo a minimum of 100,000 coming out of his purse. And then also there was a rehydration clause in that fight, which stated Canelo could not weigh more than 168, and then he weighed in 174. But I don't know if there was further money given to Angulo's camp for that, but that's sort of just the background coming into the Lara fight. And Erislandy Lara is coming off also great wins coming into this fight. He beat Austin Trout, which is probably, I think, one of the last fights of Erislandy Lara's prime. I actually considered the Canelo fight to be the last fight of his prime, that being for Erislandy Lara. And then sort of for the background of where boxing was at the time, there were, like, just to name some champions at 154, Floyd Mayweather, coming off his win off Canelo, had the WBA super welterweight title, which he won off Miguel Cotto in 2012. He had the WBC, which he won from Canelo. Carlos Molina actually had the IBF title, which then he would lose to K9 Bundridge, and then Jermall Charlo would stop K9 for that title. So that's where Jermall Charlo got his first title. And then WBO at 154 was with Boo Boo Andrade. 160, Triple G was the regular 160 champion. So there was technically the WBA 160 was vacant, and then Triple G later that year was elevated after he fought and beat Daniel Gill. The WBC at 160 was held by Miguel Cotto, who destroyed Sergio Martinez earlier that year. And the IBF was held by Sam Solomon, who Jermaine Taylor later beat for what turned out to be the last fight of his career. And it's been tragic to see what's gone on in Jermaine Taylor's life. And the WBO was held by Peter Quill and Kid Chocolate. So those are sort of the players that are surrounding the game now. And then as for just the promotional outlook at that time, Golden Boy was still in the process of their mass exodus, where a lot of people were going over to Al Heyman because this is 2014, so PBC debuted in 2015. They're all sort of just slowly shifting over to Al Heyman's banner. So Richard Schaefer is out at Golden Boy at this time. He's in his non-compete clause, and then this is Canelo's last Showtime fight before he went back to HBO and stuck with Oscar De La Hoya. As for Lara, this was Lara's last fight, as confirmed in interviews from Luis de Cubas Jr. This was Lara's last fight under Golden Boy. So just some background going into this fight, but we can get into the scorecards now.
Damn, that was a great breakdown, man. Thank you so much, dude. And Ron, I'm telling you, dude, that division was hot at the time, bro. So here's a little bit of press scoring for y'all before we get right into it. Pretty much down the line, man, you can kind of see it was about 50-50 all the way around. And then at the bottom, it says the average score from 89 media members' scorecards was 114-114. Alvarez won on 34 of the cards. Lara won on 30. And the remaining 25 were scored a draw. But now we're far removed from it, and we just got to enjoy this fight and remove ourselves from being in real time and just objectively score this fight. So we're going to get right into it, man. We're going to start with Sean Gringo Hicks. Sean, please tell us how you saw this fight.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Thank you, guys. Enjoyed the fight. And it's good to revisit fights like this, for one, to appreciate, the great boxing history and just kind of see how things are evolving or devolving, depending on your perspective. But for me, it was very much therapeutic because my mindset has totally changed. I was sharing with the guys offline, Chicano specifically, that to classify myself, for lack of better terms, was a Canelo, I want to say a hater, because I didn't just like down everything he did, but I was a doubter. Like I was still doubting his ability. But keep in mind, I was coming off the disappointment of the one. So, I was like, where is he at exactly? And, I'm Texas biased. You had Ronnie Shields, Lara was out of Plex in Houston. So there was that as well, kind of factoring into my psyche when I originally saw it. So when I really saw it, I scored the fight 7-5 when I really saw it. And it's weird. Like when I remember watching it, I don't remember Lara, I say moving, but running so much. So I remember getting not really, it didn't happen almost. It's weird. But when I watched it this time, it was literally like those points of the fight, I say pretty much like rounds, like the middle rounds, like when Canelo started to really pick it up. I was just point up, straight up frustrated, So that being said, there was a lot of good body movement. I think towards the later half, you really saw where Canelo was able to decisively cut the ring off, and the body shots were definitely affecting Lara. And I think that, that was slowing him down. He still had his game plan. But the thing was, like when he was pot shotting and trying to hit with that, overhand left or that straight left, which was landing and had a good 1-2, like he tried to establish in the beginning, when he went away from it, he went away from it. And it was really discouraging from a standpoint of enjoyment level. So I say that to say that when I rewatched it, just trying to be as objective as possible, I had going old school on the scoring, by the way, too. So I scored it 6-4 for Lara, and I had 2 swing rounds. So my swing rounds I had were 2 and 11, and I watched the rounds isolated again, and it just wasn't a decisive enough either way for me to give it to one or the other. So, you know, I could definitely see how someone would score it, 115 or 113 either way, or possibly a draw. But that's how I scored the fight. So I had 6-4 for Lara, and the rounds that I gave him were 1, 3, 5, 6, 10, 12, and for Canelo 2, 4, 7, 8, 9. And then I am also too, obviously the sweet science is about hit and not get hit, and I like the damage that he was able to establish, but um, there was just so few and far between. So again, it was enjoyable to watch, but like the moments in between where the action was taking place, and I love the sweet science was at times annoying for lack of a better word. So I could see the argument on both sides, and there was a lot of technical things going on, but there was just straight up a track meet that did break out in the middle of the fight, which I didn't enjoy. So from that standpoint, I could see why fans would point to this fight, but at the same time, all credit to Canelo. You can see how he's gotten better. I know recently in an interview, Lara said like 3 months ago, Canelo's gotten way better as a fighter and his ability to cut the ring off, which I think if he was able to do that earlier, it would have been probably a clear victory for him. But only with 97 shots landed, even though there was a lot of damage, he did have a lot of misses. And that's where I got to score I got. So thank you.
All right. That was great. And great observations, Gringo. So in your classification, you have Lara winning this fight, but it is not a robbery. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, not a robbery at all. I mean, I'm sure he was frustrated, and a lot of fans point to it. Literally, a few days ago, Mayweather brought it up as some kind of contentious thing, but to me, there's really no contention. And with the help of Chicano, I put together the trailer, and I wanted to include the part where, in their people's minds, they really see the fight as some sort of just slick boxer just dancing circles around Canelo, when that wasn't the case, at all. There was moments where you could really see, Canelo stepping up his game and, using his ring IQ and making adjustments. It's just, there wasn't enough engagement for him to take advantage.
Awesome stuff, man. And one of the things I'd like to mention is I actually reached out to all HCP affiliates and welcomed them to take a look at this fight and give me their scorecards. So in between panelists, I'm going to sprinkle in some special guest scorecards that we have. And we're going to start with D-Style Boxing, El Capitan. He had it scored 115, 113 for Canelo. He gave Canelo's round 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, and 12, with the swing rounds being 2, 3, 4, 5. But he did indicate that some other rounds were also close, and he indicated it as a close fight either way. All right, and so let's move on to Nopal Boxeanos. Nopal, what did you think about this fight, man?
Well, this is back in the day, when I saw this fight, I was really looking forward to it because, as we last week we saw, Lara was he had fought 2 exciting fights, with Angulo, and also previous to that with Williams. And I was really looking forward to that fight back then. But it was it turned out to be kind of frustrating. But it's a little easier to watch now because of course we've been talking about it for years, and I've actually rescored this just like Gringo a couple times, but I actually lost all my notes. And this is how I ended up scoring it this time. I had it 8-4 Canelo. I think it was obvious that Lara won the first round. I think and then the second round, it was a close round, but I gave it to Canelo. I think by this time, the crowd started getting a little uneasy. They were even yelling stuff at Lara, I think. And then round 3, I gave it to Canelo. I think that Lara almost stole that round towards the end, but I don't think it was enough with that one shot that he landed. And then round 4, I gave it to Canelo. He was picking up his body attack big time. And by this time, Lara was, he was running from side to side, basically, I think that it was a little excessive. And, that's why basically I gave the round to Canelo. I think this was probably Canelo's clearest round, number 4. And I think that Lara kind of threw this round away by using that movement like that. It was excessive basically. Round 5, I gave it to Canelo. He kept the body attack going. And by this time the crowd was yelling again at Lara. Round 6, I think that Canelo took this round off. He did some good work towards the end. And so I gave this round to Lara. Round 7, I think this was kind of a clear round for Canelo. His body shot flurries were pretty good, and he ended up cutting Lara with the overhand punch. I think at the beginning Lara was doing okay, but then he slowed down, and that's when Canelo started with the body shot flurries, and he landed a good shot on Lara that cut him. Round 8, I think it was a good round for Canelo. He kept the pressure. This one's kind of like a swing round. Well, actually, no. This is not a swing round. This is a clear round because I think Lara took this round off. Round 9. This is the round where Lara was engaging a little bit, and there was a headbutt somewhere in there. But when Lara gets to the corner, Ronnie Shields tells him, keep up these, keep up the good work, basically, which kind of leads me to believe that Ronnie Shields knew what was going on. That the judges and basically the crowd was gonna heavily influence everything, and he was trying to tell Lara that he needed to do a little more than that, but it was already basically going into the 10th. So round 10, I gave this clear. I think this was a clear round for Lara. He did pretty good work. Round 11, I think that Lara continued to connect very well. And Canelo basically just gave these 2 rounds away, I believe. And then round 12, he picks it back up. And in my scorecard, he got this. So I scored it 116 to 112, 8 rounds to 4 Canelo.
All right. Thank you very much, No Paul. I appreciate that. Great breakdown, dude. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to another guest scorecard. This one comes from Kenny T, one half of Mano a Mano with Maestro A. You can catch those 2 on Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Great show. Also, Kenny has started his own channel, Knocked Out by Kenny. So please feel free to check him out. I'm sure if you guys know us, you know him. And he had this fight scored 115, 113 to Canelo. He gave Canelo rounds 4, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12. And 7. And he indicated this. He said, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In this instance, meaning you judge these fights with your own criteria, because there isn't a set criteria used to judge them. This fight was extremely difficult to score due to about 3 or 4 rounds that could have gone either way. And his swing rounds are around 5, 6, and 10. And so that's what we got from Kenny T. And I have to agree with them. Like, we do have the 4 parameters in which we score, but there's really not much information on what that means. So it's kind of left to interpretation. I had the benefit of talking to Ronnie Shields about volume versus clean punching, and he gave me his opinion. And I thought it was very interesting. And I found myself like asking, like, well, is that how everybody feels? And I looked around, and there's no clear rules. Not really, so I understand what he says, like when he says that. So, all right, let's get right into it with Run PMC. Run, how'd you see this fight, brother?
Definitely a great fight. You could definitely see, as everyone's touched on as already, that Canelo has vastly improved since this fight. Like, he seemed in this fight more one-dimensional, for lack of a better term, than obviously you see now. And Lara, I believe this was Lara's last fight in his prime. He had a slight resurgence when he fought Jarrett Hurd, but really you could see the age and him just wearing down in the latter rounds of that fight. But this was the end of Lara's prime, and this might be the start of Canelo's prime, depending when you look at that. But I had this fight, a very competitive fight, but I had this 116, 112 for Erislandy Lara. I gave Canelo round 4, 7, 8, and 12. And I gave Lara 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11. my swing round, which I would say I only had one swing round, and that was round 9. And the reason I think I only had one swing round was because a lot of these rounds were competitive. So if I were to honestly really put all the rounds, it would be just a ton of close rounds. So I thought the ninth was a swing round, and I gave that to Lara. Um, the things I thought really stood out for me were that when we talk about, I mean, everyone, like, we don't have like really descriptions of uh what the parameters are, if there's a hierarchy of parameters. It seems like depending what network you're work or who's broadcasting the fight, they seem to say like effective aggressiveness might be number one, or clean and effective punching might be number one. I think we can agree that the clean punching probably was going to be number one, but it all depends on what the fight gives you too, because depending on the styles, there might not be that many clean and effective punches, or there might be just someone commanding the ring in other ways. But I think the main thing, that the reason I was giving Lara rounds was the clean punches he was landing. And I think it's because for a viewer looking on, when you have punches to the head, they're more telling and they're easier to see than punches to the body. And I think also you could say an effective aggressor is also the ring general, but if you look at like what a ring general is, it's basically like being able to employ your own game plan and dictate the pace. And I think that's really stood out to me with what Lara was doing. Like, it might not be the most fan friendly style, but he was, I think, dictating the pace in a way, or making Canelo fight, as the announcers or as the commentators. I was watching the international broadcast for this one, as they were saying, they kept saying, and it was Doug Fisher, who's an employee of the ring, who's owned by Golden Boy, what's owned by Golden Boy, and he said Canelo was fighting out of character several times throughout the fight, which I found interesting, because it's like, I don't think Canelo was fighting out of character. I think he was doing what he had to do, but I think Lara was employing his game plan more effectively. Did Lara slow down? Yes, and that's when Canelo could come in and win those rounds. Because I did give Canelo the 7 and 8, and he could have won 9 potentially. Um, so those middle rounds, and I gave Canelo the 12th as well, because I think Lara just didn't do enough in that round to win. But I think ring generalship and the clean punching, and especially since it was to the head, and I think it's just more telling for the judges. Um, Canelo did do great body work. Some of it's in clinches, and some of it was borderline to the side and to the back, which I think we have to talk about, like what's a scoring punch, or what's considered a scoring punch, because I didn't look up what the definition of a scoring punch is, but I mean, it's sort of hard to tell what the judges will give points for, and what their definition of a scoring blow is. But I don't think if you're scoring off of a break, or if you're scoring in a clinch and they tell you to break, I don't think those are really scoring punches, especially if they're towards the back. But definitely a good fight. I don't think it's necessarily a robbery, because I think I've been pretty straight. I think I've only said like one fight has been a robbery, or maybe two fights have been a robbery. So I used to think it was a quote unquote robbery. And then when I scored it live, I scored it 9-3. So I gave Canelo one more round in this rescore. But I definitely think Lara should have been the winner of this fight. Um, we talked about a little about the politics going, and with Golden Boy, I mean, Canelo did great work, but I think we can't ignore the politics that were surrounding Golden Boy at the time, and how they're losing a big chunk of their roster, and Canelo really being the cash cow. And I don't think they could really, I mean, they could salvage his career, but they don't want 2 out of 3 losses in his last 3 fights. But definitely a great fight. But I think Lara won. I don't think it's a robbery, but I had him 8-4 winning.
All right. Thank you very much. Run PMC had Laura winning, but not necessarily a robbery, but in his mind, a clear decision for Laura. Well,
Yes.
Thank you, man. And so what I'd like to do is feature another guest scorecard from IBT Boxing Truth. Now, he's not a member of HCP, but I've always found him to be objective. You guys can find him around like on different streams, but he has great breakdowns of fights and great predictions as well. So I asked him, and he took the time to score it last night, and he gave me some information, and I'd like to read it off. So IBT Boxing Truth has it 115, 113 for Canelo, and he gave Canelo rounds 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12. And here's what he has to say about it. Overall, the bout was extremely close, and it is apparent just based on the stylistic matchup why it would be a controversial and close match. I saw the bout as highly competitive and definitely arguable in either direction, but I felt the argument for Canelo winning was stronger. The fight was a tale of opposite game plans. Lara was boxing on the back foot, using his movement and jab to frustrate Canelo and keep away from his power punches while attempting to walk Canelo into his counter shots. Canelo, on the other hand, was stalking his foe and attempting to land as many left hooks and right hands to the body and the head when the opportunity presented itself. Lara did his best work when he was able to move using the whole ring and when mixing his combinations to the body and head. Lara employed excellent usage of his jab and left straights when he threw them, but often took too long to reset between interactions, which resulted in multiple lulls in action as a result. These spells of inactivity hurt him in many close rounds. Canelo, on the other hand, struggled to cut off the ring and was unable to land as many power punches as normal. It was a great tactic to target Lara to the body from the get-go to minimize his stamina and movement in later rounds. Canelo's best moments in the fight were when he was able to get Lara's back up against the ropes and fire off hooks and straights before catching Lara as he exited the pocket. Lara was inconsistent in his defensive responsibility as he left the pocket and took a lot out of heavy body shots as a result. Lara's most commonly landed punch was the southpaw jab, and Canelo's most commonly landed punch was the left hook to the liver. Overall, the punch stats have Canelo leading in power punches and Lara leading in jabs. Thank you, IBT Boxing Truth, for that breakdown. Great stuff, man. And I'd like to go to Sonteo Media and see what he has to say. Sonteo, please break it down for us. You're on mute, brother.
I had Canelo winning 115 to 113. I watched it on mute, and so that I wouldn't be persuaded by the audience. My swing rounds were 2, 6, 8, and 11. A lot of conclusions that I reached were mentioned here by a lot of the panelists. There were huge sections of the fight where it was difficult to score. And I think ultimately the conclusion that I reached was, what do you favor? Do you favor Lara's 1-2 accuracy or Canelo's left hook to the liver? I've only scored a handful of fights. Usually I didn't score this weekend's fights. I just like to watch them and enjoy them. But I think the first fight I ever scored was Adrian Broner versus Jesse Vargas. So I've only scored a few fights after that. But as I was watching, I don't know how judges do it, but as I was watching, I'd create a little tally mark on my sheet of paper when somebody did something of significance. So I just created this little system myself. I don't know if judges are allowed to do this or not, but it keeps a tally of who's having success, whether that be of any of the 4 criteria or whether it be just a punch combination. And ultimately, that's what it came down to. Lara had a great 1-2. I had him winning a super close round. I think it was the 10th, and he landed 2 significant 1-2s, and I couldn't find something that Canelo did of more significance, so I gave it to Lara. There was 4 swing rounds on my tally, which means it could go completely the opposite way. So 115 for Canelo and 113 for Lara. That's what I come up with.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sonteo. All right. Well, I have to say that I also had it for Canelo. I had it 115, 113 for Canelo. And the rounds I gave Canelo is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, and 12. But I had to watch a lot of these rounds a few times. And then also I found myself, when watching some of these rounds in isolation, forming a different opinion of the round. So it's very interesting to go back and watch. In my opinion, it was kind of a difficult fight to watch as well and score. But I did have a good number of swing rounds. Like I thought round 2 could be a swing round, round 6, rounds 11 and 12 possibly being swing rounds as well. And it's like you were saying, Sonteo, like, it's up to interpretation of what you like. I did think that Canelo was owning the real estate in the ring. Now, some people will say, well, Canelo needs to cut off the ring. But in my opinion, that isn't always necessarily the aggressor's responsibility to do so. When we watch boxing, we're here to watch combat. We're here to watch engagement. That's why I can give Tank the decision over the weekend, and I could give Haney the decision over the weekend. Both of them were in the pocket for most of the time. I think that what Lara was doing was running. It felt to me like what he would do is he would try to pop off a 1-2, and if he got it, or even if he didn't get it, he would coast for like 15 seconds until people started booing, and then he would get back in range for a second and then try to do the same thing. And if you're talking about range, Canelo dominated the range. Now, I do think that a person can fight on the outside if it benefits them, and they should, especially if you're tall or long. You can fight on the outside, but that's still in range. It's still in the pocket. Lara hardly stood there at all, even though that was where he had his best moments. Now, Canelo was dominating on the inside and in mid-range. Lara couldn't make a stand at any time to show his aggressiveness or his dominance. On top of that, too, he never really made a stand in the ring. So, to me, that's effective aggression. On top of that, too, I think when people look at this fight, they go back and, they think in their minds of a couple of highlights of Canelo swinging in air, and he did miss a lot, but people are over-exaggerating it, in my opinion. If you look at the punch stats, Canelo landed only 10 less shots, and he actually landed 36 more power punches, while Lara landed 46 more jabs. Now, I understand that the CompuBox doesn't tell the whole story, but Canelo was throwing the meaningful shots, and you could say that Lara neutralized Canelo's jab, but I think it was part of the game plan to not jab Lara so that Lara couldn't counter Canelo. And I also think that's telling for Lara's game plan as well, because I think Lara's output was reduced because he didn't want to get in exchanges. But to me, it was clear that the power punches were clearly coming from Canelo. So that's pretty much how I had it, and I do count time where somebody's outside of the pocket. Now, we've gone back and we've rescored a lot of controversial fights that had somebody who was on the back foot. The Whitaker fights against Chavez and De La Hoya. And in those fights, and I mentioned this when we were doing the rescore, he was really crafty at realizing when his opponent, his effective aggressor, was taking a break, and then he would go on the front foot. And it could have been because he was trying to show that he was being aggressive, whether it was real or not. He at least showed moments where he was the effective aggressor, where he was standing in the pocket, and he was also dangerous on the inside as well for those fights. And I classified both of those as robberies. Same thing with Floyd. He did that versus Maidana. When Maidana was done getting his stuff off, Floyd would go on the front foot, and he was crafty enough to show his dominance, whether it was real or not, whether he was taking advantage of Maidana gassing out and taking breaks. Mayweather understood the ebb and the flow. On top of that, he made his stance. He was able to fight in the pocket on the back foot. And we were mentioning Floyd versus Canelo earlier. If you watch that fight, Canelo's trying to get it off, but he can't. But Floyd is in the pocket most of the time. So to me, if you're out of range, then you're retreating. And I think that matters. Like historically, boxing is a combat sport. Historically, you're supposed to physically dominate your opponent. Things have gotten safer and has been regulated over time. But historically, it is prize fighting. We're there to see a fight. And if you're not engaging, well, I think that counts against you. So the times where Lara was just backing up over and over again, I count that. It has some type of value. And even Sergio Mora in the Devin Haney fight, he was talking about when you push the action, when you're the guy on the front foot, that counts towards points. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with how he was viewing it because I felt that Jojo Diaz should have gotten off a bit more. But the total punches were actually quite close compared to how some people tend to remember it. So that's what I have to say about the fight. I have it 115, 113 for Canelo, and I think it was the right decision. So now we can get into it a little bit and just kind of talk about different dynamics of this fight, man, because there's a lot of different considerations when we talk about scoring and just everything all around. So if anybody wants to open up, we can get right into it.
Something that I want to, also throw in there as well. And I appreciate the input and scores of everybody and like good stuff and really good points and perspectives is how perception is reality and how you see things differently. Like, again, I was a hater back then, 2014, or I said like a disbeliever. That's the word I use as far as Canelo and over analyzing, when you're looking for something like, oh man, he knows he lost. So at the end of the fight, like his body language, people were, that were, I guess, anti-Canelo, if you will, we're talking about his body language. But now watching it again, I think he was just frustrated because all the movement of Lara is that he wasn't engaging as much as he wanted to. I don't see it as like, oh man, I lost. Hopefully they give me the victory. I mean, I think there was maybe some doubt because it was close, obviously, but I think that there was, that's my perspective that he was just frustrated from the lack of engagement. So, I kind of had a 180 on how I viewed that moment. And also, again, got to send another shout out to Lara's cut, man. Like, again, a massive cut he got in the 7th round, like he got the hematonian in the Williams fight, was really a non-factor. Like, it just got mentioned, the round after in the 8th round, but after that, it was really a non-factor. It was more about the actual fight. So that's the two things that I wanted to comment on.
I only noticed him rub the eye a couple times after, like in the 9th or the 10th, and he was out of range. So he was out of range. He'd wipe his eye, but you're right. I think they got it under control. And I also noticed the same thing you noticed was at the end of some rounds, how they walk to their corner. If the judges are paying attention to that, that makes a difference, I think. I remember Mikey Garcia used to pump his fist after certain rounds in the Spence fight, and we're like, why is he doing that? He clearly lost that round. But I think it's just perception and it's psychological. If the round is close and it's only 1 or 2 punches the difference of which way it goes, if you see a fighter go into his corner like, yeah, I got that one, and you see the other one just walk over to his corner normally, that might persuade you to give a certain fighter a round. That's just my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, body language is huge. I mean, we see it as fans, and judges are human too. They're looking at it. They're looking at everything, and especially like we said, this fight is close. They're looking at something to lean the other way, and so that's the thing that kind of stood out to me is I think that there was not being defeated. I think there was just some kind of frustration. And, I thought there was also another thing that was interesting to me, too, as far as Ronnie Shields. He was happy with the game plan. I forgot who mentioned this, but I do believe that, Paul, like Ronnie Shields knew they had to pick it up at the end. They were not engaging enough. Like, he felt good about the game plan, but he knew they had to put their foot on the gas because they had let too many rounds get away. So, great point.
All right. And I just got a text from D-Style. It's funny because I was trying to text in the chat too. So people have been hanging out and trying to put in messages, man. I really don't know what's going on. I'm going to have to look into that. But I appreciate those listeners. I see you 13 out there, and I appreciate it, man. So just continue to enjoy, man. And things like this happen. We'll have to figure it out. But those are some great observations. And one of the things that I also wanted to add as far as body language goes is I do think that Canelo was also frustrated because, hey, let's be honest. I mean, to score it, it was entertaining. But I also think that fight was a little bit of a stinker. Like, I would never go back and watch that for entertainment purposes. That's just my opinion. Now, boxing is prize fighting, and it's also a business, and we're in the business of being entertained, and to most spectators, they were booing. I had a pay-per-view party going on that time, and I'll tell you what, like, they really weren't having a good time of it, and that fight just wasn't entertaining in my opinion, and Canelo made that fight. Like I said, if Lara was 1 punch ahead, he would take that as like, okay, well, now I'm just going to start dancing, as long as is socially acceptable, and then maybe do something else. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I feel. I think there's a difference between boxing circles around someone and just running circles around somebody. There's no question to me who the effective aggressor was. And I don't know, man, like, and this is just how I feel. And I'm just going to talk about it since we're giving it to y'all Al Chile. I feel like some people who have this fight for Lara, they feel like the sense of superiority for appreciating somebody who's on the back foot. And I can appreciate that too, but there's a difference between going on the back foot in range and running, and they happen to think that the alternative is just like this come forward, lumbering dude who's just throwing wild haymakers and missing and hitting air. And that's not what this fight was. Canelo was connecting. He was doing great work, and that's what I have to say about it.
No, I think that's a great point, and I know you brought it up before. I believe that was Yuji Kano as far as like mentioning the Sweet Pea Whitaker fight when he fought Chavez and how he fought on the back foot, but he was able to sense when he had to get back into the pocket and engage and move in and out. Like that, to me, was clearly more superior. He's a superior fighter, but as far as like the engagement level, and that was an entertaining fight to me. I know they had some people, as far as like frustrated from the standpoint of the Chavez side, as far as like, he wasn't in the pocket enough. But I thought compared to this, and that was like a war compared to this, as far as like the level of engagement. So kind of like to you guys, just kind of collectively, because like I said, being non-objective, why do you think this fight is always kind of brought up? Like it was brought up by Floyd because of the doubt, because of the style that was used by Lara. Why do you think this fight is thrown in the face of people that support and are fans and backers of Canelo? Because to me, after watching it again, I wouldn't be and I did favor Lara. I wouldn't throw it in anybody's face. It's just a really close fight that could have went either way. Why do you think that is? Anybody?
Yeah, I think the reason why is because it showed the reason that they throw it in his face is because it shows he was vulnerable in a way. But if I were to throw a fight in Canelo's face, it would probably be the first Triple G fight. If you were to throw any fight in Canelo's face, because I had Lara winning this fight, but Lara didn't do himself any. He didn't do himself any good by moving as much as he did, and the Cuban fighters, at least the more recent ones, sort of do that. Like Rigondeaux, extraordinary skill set, but moved too much, especially later in his career. But for Canelo, I think it's just because they see him in a quote unquote vulnerable state, and then that's the one that they go to. I don't know why they don't go to the first Triple G fight because that's a equally contentious fight, but it's one that it's a more modern day Canelo, it's closer to what he is as a boxer now. So I think it's just because they have outs where they could just say, "Oh, well, he didn't know how to cut off the ring," or they just have these things that are like everyone said, like preconceived notions. But that fight's also from 7+ years ago. Why don't you go back just a few years and then you could go to the Triple G fight? So I think it's just because it's an easy excuse, and it's one that they probably are not going to rewatch the fight. And they could be like,
Yeah.
and it could show. Sometimes they could try to show that they were a credible boxing source, because then that's a fight that happened a while ago and some newer boxing fans might not have seen it. So they'd be like, oh, of course you should know in that fight. Whereas this other one, everyone saw Canelo Triple G. So those are the reasons I think why.
No, that's a
And
great point. Because to me, go ahead, no, Paul. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, as a fan of just boxing, like if someone were to throw this fight in my face, like I would laugh, like, and I'm just kind of wondering how you guys feel, because it's not like he got schooled or he got hurt or nothing. He just got frustrated, and you could argue that he won. A lot of people feel that he did win.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. Like when I went to go look at controversial fights that we could score, I would go on Reddit and other places, and all these people would have lists, and I rarely saw Canelo versus Lara as like, oh, robberies. Like, what's a robbery? Hardly ever was it listed. And this is just objectively just people on Reddit giving their opinion. And I think that YouTube has a lot of hardcore boxing fans who feel very strongly about a fight in the past. And like you said, maybe if they don't like Canelo, they could sit there and go, oh, that was a robbery. But like even Floyd Mayweather said that could go either way. Paulie Malignaggi right afterwards, he's another Canelo hater. He said, oh, it could have gone either way. Like, and I showed you the press row scoring. Like, this fight was close. Like this idea that it was a robbery, I think people use that term a little bit too much. On top of that too, man, I'd like to say that Canelo is also the one that went on to do the greater things, just like in the Trout fight. Like he's the one who's continuing on. Everybody still had an opportunity to make fights. Lara still got some good fights. Trout still got some good fights. But Canelo's the one who's turning into the all-time great. So, I mean, you could say in a way, when you couple that with the entertainment factor, as well as the cash cow factor, I mean, boxing does what it does. You know what I mean? You're muted.
Oh, no, Paul, something you wanted to add? I want to make sure you got your point, brother.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what Run was saying. A lot of times when people want to kind of take credit away from Canelo in these times, a lot of the time they do go really far back. I know Caleb Plant when they asked him if he thought he could hurt Canelo, he went as far back as Jose Miguel Cotto, who is Cotto's brother. He was saying if he can put him on queer legs, then why can't I? But that was really far back, and it was a way different set of circumstances. And what I like to tell people a lot is Canelo didn't really have an amateur career. He often, when they ask him about it, he said that he wasn't, when he was like young, he didn't like the rules that they had, so he just became a pro basically at 15. And even if you split up his career that he had in Mexico versus when he came to the US and started fighting, I mean, that was another jump in competition all by itself, because the competition that he was fighting in Mexico was almost purely just to build him up, to build the fan base up. And when he came to the US, then he started fighting the American fighters, which have a better skill set, and you know what I mean, there's more competition. You'll see people over here in the US with records that are like 26-0. Now that's a pretty good record right there. But in Mexico, when you get a guy that's 26-0, then you don't know because it's a whole different level of competition. So, the U.S. competition is worldwide competition. So, like I like to tell people is, if you go back and observe Canelo's career, it's like he's learning, on the job. And, I would say that his first, you know, I say that the Triple G fight, he was still learning stuff there. And, I think that his coming out party was actually versus Jacobs. And I think he was already, like 28 years old or something
Yeah.
when he fought Jacobs. I think that's when he was already at basically his full potential. You know what I mean? And then even after that, he learned a couple more things. In this Lara fight, I think that this was a great fight, for him because he afterwards he understood how far he was, the things that he needs to learn, and these experiences, even the Floyd fight, it showed him that he had a lot to learn, and that he's gonna have to win fights in a more dominant fashion, and he's come a long way.
No, absolutely. Great point, brother. So yeah, that I think another thing to me that I think a stigma that was kind of thrown out there that I'll just go ahead and say like that Bud Crawford mentioned when he said that Canelo doesn't want to fight black fighters, and if you replace the racial component and talk about athletic fighters, I think that actually Lara, being an Afro-Cuban, hurt a lot of brothers because this is not a stylistic fight. I don't think as much. Yeah, there's styles that he'd rather not fight, but also from the standpoint of being entertaining. It is entertainment, like Chicano said. So I think he wouldn't want. Like, first of all, I don't think there's anyone out there that could do it at the weight class he's in anyway because he's moved up so much. But I think he's avoided fighters that he saw similar to Lara because he was afraid of another stinker. Like I know Chicano said, and I know Mayweather even said that, Mayweather Senior, that they stunk up the joint. In his opinion. So no, good points, guys.
I think what kind of rubbed me the wrong way in terms of Lara in this fight was he tried to make a big deal about making Canelo miss. Like there was like 3 or 4 instances in the fight where he makes a miss and then he kind of runs out to the edge of the ring and like makes a gesture to the crowd, to let everybody know that he made a miss. But in reality, I don't know how effective that is when you're the one fighting on the back foot. I think the majority of fans just in general like the fighter that's trying to that's moving forward. I think it worked against him.
No, that's
one thing. Sorry, Sean. One thing that really surprised me in this is, they said it was a robbery. Lara was basically protesting that they wanted a rematch and everything. I wouldn't have objected to a rematch, by the way, but the way they complained about it, I mean, they didn't complain about nothing like this close to it with the Paul Williams fight, which most of us agreed that he won most of those rounds.
No, that's
that's very surprising.
No, that's a great point. I know he was asked point blank. I mean, obviously the platform, he's getting a lot more notoriety. It's obviously a bigger fight. He got paid $1 million when he fought Canelo, a much bigger purse. So, but yeah, I know to this day, and even Ronnie Shields feel like that was a bigger robbery than the Paul Williams fight, which is insane to me. Like that fight was like clear. So that's a great point, no, Paul.
I think the reason that they might think it's a bigger robbery is because the stakes of the fight. So that's, I think, probably why they think it. And also, I don't know if they filed. I'm sure they filed a protest when they fought in New Jersey and Atlantic City against Paul Williams, but all of those judges were suspended by the commission anyway. So I don't know if that was through Lara's team filing a protest or if that was just done by the commission preemptively. But there definitely was action taken against the judges in that fight.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to point out as far as this idea of Canelo missing, and I'm kind of new to looking at the overall accuracy percentage, but the disparity was kind of similar between the Canelo Lara fight and the fights that we just saw over the weekend. So Canelo had a 23% accuracy rating as opposed to Lara who had 28. So 5%. And then if we look at Haney versus Diaz, it was 27 to 24, so 3%. And then Cruz was actually more accurate at 29% versus 22%, which is a 7% difference. You know what I mean? So he wasn't that inaccurate, and I don't necessarily like hold it against a fighter if they're missing, if a fighter's out of range. I start scoring defense when you're throwing and you're missing, and the guy is in range, whether it be like from the outside, mid range, or from the inside, and you're blocking shots or slipping them. That's how I score defense.
I have a question with the Canelo Lara fight, and then with the fights this weekend. What was the output like for just like total punches thrown for both those fights, or for those 3 fights?
So, and keep in mind, we're going to lightweight. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm interested to see how much more they had, because those are relatively low output fights this weekend, in my opinion, especially
So,
Sunday's fight.
well, it was still a whole hell of a lot more. Actually, well, I mean, okay, so Tank versus Cruz. Tank threw 462 versus Cruz's 553.
Right.
So Cruz threw a lot more, but Tank ended up landing one more power punch, and Tank also ended up landing 11 more jabs over Cruz. So he dominated both. Well, not dominated, but I think he did the cleaner work. That's why I had Tank winning the fight. Like, I didn't use these punch stats, but it just kind of confirms how I saw things. And then Haney versus Diaz. Haney outthrew and outlanded. So Haney had 614 punches thrown compared to Diaz's 573. And then Haney had landed 164 versus Diaz's 140. And then Haney landed 41 more power punches, while Diaz landed 17 more jabs.
That's interesting. That's interesting that Diaz landed fewer power punches, because that power punch anything but a jab. It's not the how hard they're being thrown, right? So it's interesting that Diaz, but it makes sense with how him trying to get on the inside, he's sort of just touching with the jab. But what were the final punches or punch stats for Canelo Lara, like just the output?
Sure. As far as like the punches thrown.
Yes, yeah, total punches thrown. Yeah.
Yeah, so total punches thrown, Canelo threw 415 versus
Okay.
Lara's 386.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just thinking about, I'm just thinking about how, like, playing like devil's advocate against myself. How could you give other rounds to Canelo, or how could you give them to Canelo? How could you give them Lara? And I think you can give them Canelo because you could look at like how hard the punches were being, how hard they were landing to the body. And then you can give them to Lara because being in a relatively low output fight with Lara could potentially win rounds, or quote unquote steal rounds, because he has the more telling shots to the head, and it's because it's a pretty low output fight.
I only remember doing that once. I only remember having the output switched and then saying, I don't care that Canelo landed more. Lara's 1-2, with my visual eye did more damage. So I'm gonna, even though I have like on my tally 8 for Canelo and only 6 for Lara, I convinced myself to give the round to Lara because Lara's 1-2 made Canelo stop in his tracks, and I hadn't seen that the entire fight. So I was like, I have to give that to Lara because it's more significant than even though Canelo, let's say, did a lot more damage with his 7s, which is the left hook to the body. I couldn't justify it. I said that's not only did he do it once, I said he did it in the 2nd minute, in the 3rd minute, and I think it was the very last punch where Lara threw a 1-2, and I was like, I just can't. I have to give that round to Lara, even though Canelo was more active.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And you only did that once. Do you remember what round that was in?
Yeah, I'll look it up. You guys can move on, but I'll find it. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I was just trying to think about. I'm like, how could either of the judges score to either way, and especially with this weekend because I thought Haney, in the eyes of the judges, could have edged it, and then he was being more active and landing more power punches, and then Tank ended up landing more power punches, but it just seemed like Cruz was sort of, at least in my opinion, sort of pushing the action, and Tank was more of trying to box at times. Oh, I think
Chicano's thing froze.
Screen froze. So I don't know what Chicano had planned for the rest of the show, but I think we can conclude that, at least for me, I'm out of the ones remaining, I'm the only one that had it for for Lara, but definitely competitive fight. It was definitely, at least from me scoring or us scoring fights as of late, I think it sharpened our abilities to score fights. And I definitely don't think it was a robbery. I think Lara should have won, but I definitely don't think it was a quote unquote robbery. But it seems like we have a stacked. When Chicano comes back, we can touch on it and close it out if he wants. But it seems like we have a pretty stacked weekend coming up. With it looks like we have 5 fights coming up, or 1, 2, 3, 4 fights this weekend. We have the return of Vasily Lomachenko against Richard Comey, Nonito Donaire's return, Conor Benn versus Chris Algieri, and then John Rael Casimero versus Paul Butler. Which one of those cards do you think you all will be watching this weekend?
I'll definitely be watching the Loma fight, but I also
Loma.
have interest in Algieri.
Algieri. Santiago, are any of Robert's fighters on the Loma card?
I was thinking that earlier in the week, and
Yeah.
no, they're not.
None. Okay. That should be interesting.
Because he just had Alexis Espino on the Matchroom card in Las Vegas, and he fought to a draw. And then he had 3 fighters in Stockton on a kind of like a lower promotion event.
Yeah.
He had Raymond's older brother who fights at super bantamweight. His name is Gabriel Murataya.
Yep.
And he's been on Top Rank on a couple shows. He won. And then he has a Mexican Olympian who just turned pro like a month or 2 ago. So he fought his second win. His name is Sawayo. His nickname is Sawayo. His real name is, his last name is Cardenas. His first name is Arturo Cardenas. Okay. And I think he fights at 126. And then they had another fighter that's connected to the Murataya family, whose name is Felix Soria. And I think he's fairly new as a pro as well. But those were the 3 wins that he had in Stockton, and then he had the draw with Alexis in Las Vegas.
Okay, yeah, because I always think when I see those Top Rank cards, I always assume RGBA is going to be on the undercard or in a co-main somehow. What about you, Nopal? Which card do you think you'll be watching this weekend? Because they're all on Saturday. There are 4 of them on Saturday. So if you had to pick one, which one do you think?
Oh man, I can't miss the Loma fight. I want to see that. I think he's gonna win easily, bro.
Yes.
What's his name? Too big and too sloppy for him. He's gonna be all over the place, and I think he's gonna get a knockout. I actually think he's the best lightweight, man.
Loma.
Regardless of who's got all the belts or whatever, I think he's the best. And I would really like to see him versus Gambosis. What were the other fights that you said, Run?
Yeah, there's obviously the Loma versus Comey fight. Then there's Nonito Donaire versus Raymart Gaballo. I honestly don't know his opponent. Then Conor Benn versus Chris Algieri in England in DAZN, so that's probably going to be earlier in the day. And then John Rael Casimero versus Paul Butler. So I'll probably, if I were to pick one, I'd probably be watching earlier in the day the Conor Benn Chris Algieri, just to see the journey of Conor Benn. Exactly. Obviously, we know Chris Algieri is older now, and he was never like the top fighter, but he's a beast in the gym. He's always in good shape, so he's definitely a good gatekeeper, if you will, to see where Conor Benn's at, and he's going to present a moving style to Conor Benn, so Conor Benn's going to have to hunt him down. So definitely interesting. But I agree with Nopal. I think Loma's going to run through Comey, and it makes me think, like, did Tio really get lucky? Not lucky because he planned the shot, but with his knockout of Comey, and how would have that looked like down the stretch with Comey? Because Comey, like, he's not the best fighter, but he's definitely had like a lot of good fights, and I think he beat guys like Robert Easter and some of the other guys he fought in the past. So it's definitely should be interesting, and it just keeps building up. I mean, Loma's probably not targeting Teofimo anymore. He's probably going to target Kambosos or Haney, or try to get or whoever the winner of that is. So, or maybe Tio fights Loma in a comeback fight. I doubt that will happen because Tio's probably moving up. But it's definitely lightweight's hot this last 3 weeks. It's definitely a crazy thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's sort of previewing this weekend. But we have a rescore for next week, like we always pick, and we have 2 that Chicano mentioned. We have the first Ward Kovalev fight, which is one option. Then we have Evander Holyfield versus Valuev. So what do you guys think about for next week? Which one do you want to rescore?
I would lean towards
the Kovalev fight. The Ward.
Ward?
Yeah.
Ward Kovalev? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree because, I mean, it's just definitely a little more recent, and also seeing like how it's starting to heat up with the guys at 175. I think it would be pretty topical to talk about a very close fight that we had. I think it was in 2016, end of 2016. Crazy, almost. It's like 5 years ago now. It seems like it was just yesterday we watched that fight, seeing Ward get knocked down early. But yeah, so that's what it is for next week. It'll be Sergey Kovalev, Andre Ward 1, which took place at the end of 2016. Great fight.
Run play and see. I looked back at my notes, and it's round 10 where I made that
Round
decision.
10?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was in favor of Lara.
Right? I gave it to
Yeah. That's those later rounds were definitely I think Lara, because I had Lara winning 9 through 11. So Lara definitely came on, but he doesn't do himself any favors by not being as active. Like if you can move and be active, then yes, but he didn't do himself any favors. But yes, it looks like Chicano's back.
Yeah, sorry about that, y'all. Dude, great way to wrap it up, Run, dude. Like, so yeah, we're gonna do it, man. Ward versus Kovalev. Yeah, I figure, you don't want another snoozer. I had a feeling you guys were gonna go with Kovalev Ward. You know what I mean?
It was a good one, and it's the second time we saw Andre Ward dropped outside of, I think, the first one when he fought Darnell Boone way back on the Floyd. What was that card? When Floyd fought the guy at 140, lefty, forgot his name, but so it was a great fight. I remember watching it live and just being shocked.
Yeah, I haven't watched it since I watched it live, man. So I'd be very curious to go back and take a look and see what my perceptions are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I had it a draw, but that was giving Ward the benefit of the doubt. So it'll be good to watch. And this is towards the end of the road when for HBO Boxing too. This was one of their last big fights. I mean, I think the last one was when Celia Breakus first fought Kelly Reese and Carson, but this is definitely within the last year of their run. So definitely end of an era with this fight.
Damn, that's good stuff, Ron. See, and that's why you're our hired gun, bro. All right. So, well, hey, I want to wrap it up and also apologize to the people in the chat. Thank you so much. I see you all have been listening. I don't know what happened, man. So we're going to try to figure it out. But thank you so much for sticking with us and joining us here in El Chile. So for the guys in El Chile and Sonteo Media, we are out. Peace.
Peace.
Damn, bro, what happened to G Funky?